Welcome to the Norris Group Real Estate Podcast, a show committed to bringing you insights from thought leaders shaping the real estate industry. In each episode, we'll dive into conversations with industry experts and local insiders, all aimed at helping you thrive in an ever-changing real estate market, continuing the legacy that Bruce Norris created, sharing valuable knowledge, and empowering you on your real estate journey. Whether you're a seasoned pro or a newcomer, this is your go-to source for insider tips, market trends, and success strategies. Here's your host, Craig Evans.
Hey everybody, it's Craig Evans with the Norris Group. Super excited to be back on today. We've got Joe Downs, the CEO of Belrose Group. Joe is a lifelong entrepreneur with business ventures spanning securities, mortgage, hospitality, and real estate industries. He co-founded the Belrose Group to pursue opportunities within the niche self-storage sector of commercial real estate. He's actively involved in the growth and management of the organization, and under his direction, the firm has evolved from traditional self-storage acquisition investment and expanded into including development and now consulting divisions. Joe is a penchant for finding niches within niches and identifying opportunities that are unseen to others. He dedicates time to researching and educating himself on select, lesser-known industries and welcomes the opportunity to share his knowledge and experience with others. In his position as CEO, Joe serves as a visionary and embodies a servant leadership approach. He encourages the Belrose team to be a collaborative and innovative team in their respective departments and contribute ideas and suggestions across all areas of the firm. Joe loves nothing more than connecting with people and, where possible, helping them achieve specific goals. He serves as a facilitator and educator through the Self-Storage Academy and Mastermind, where he is regularly featured as an expert speaker on the asset class. Joe has a BS from Villanova University. It's hard for me to say as a UNC fan, but he's got a BS from Villanova University. Joe, man, it is an honor to have you on today. Thank you so much for coming on, my friend.
Craig, it's so great to be here. What's funny about listening to that intro is you listen to it and you go, because you don't write it yourself, your staff writes great. I wonder if all this is true. We were Memorial Day weekend. We had my daughter and her friends over for dinner, and we were going around the table asking, like, what do your parents do? And then we got to my daughter, like, what do your parents do? Let's hear it.
Yeah. Well, man, listen, thank you so much for coming on today. It's interesting. This is why I was excited. Joe and I were talking about doing this, and the focus and the sector that you're in is a little different than what most of our investors deal in, right? It's a little different than what they do. Very familiar with storage. I've actually got one of my best friends that we used to be in business together. We had thousands of doors that we owned together, sold that portfolio off, and now he's in self-storage as well. So, but for most of the investors that follow the Norris Group and DBO Capital and everything that we do, the storage space is a little outside of their specter. So we really wanted to make people aware of the space. Part of what we do is we always, teach and preach to our investors about pivots and finding inefficiencies in the housing market and what are some of the ways that you can pivot, right? So with the barrier to entry sometimes being a little high in California, I believe this may be a way to pivot or at least to add diversification into somebody's portfolio. But I say all that to say, one of the things when somebody's new to our podcast and our audience, if it's okay, I really like to dive in and just to get to know the people a little bit, right? That's one of the things. We can all talk investing, but once you start to understand the personality and the relationship of who people are, that's a big thing for us. So if you don't mind, I want to dive into a little bit of who is Joe Downs, if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So Joey does a lot of work for us in doing history and digging in. So, I don't know what all he's given us here. If he's talking about a past girlfriend or something, I don't blame that on me. Okay. So,
remember when I said nothing's off limits?
Yeah, exactly. So So listen, I know you come from a big family,
Yeah. Okay.
and from what I'm told, it's not like that you're one of three or one of five or something like that. So tell our audience how many brothers and sisters do you have?
Well, that's some good digging you guys did. So I'm one of I would not have had me. I have 3 kids myself. I'm the 5th of 12.
12.
Love kids.
Wow.
Eight sisters, 3 brothers. Yeah.
Well,
I know all their names. I know all their birthdays. These are some of the questions we were asked growing up. Do you know all their names? Do you have 11 friends?
Well, I will say when Joey told me all that, I'll say you're the first person I've ever met that has my dad beat. He's the baby of 9.
9.
And when I'm talking about this, everybody's like, 9, I can't believe it. And so when Joey told me you were one of 12, I was like, wow.
We had 9 at one time.
Yeah, at one point. I know some other interesting facts that we found out about you, and kind of ties home with my wife's family and stuff. So I know you're an Army brat.
Yeah, I was just about to say I'm an Army brat. Yep.
Yeah,
I was born in Killeen, Texas, Fort Hood.
Okay, all right. So, but with that, if I'm understanding correctly, you spent most of your time in Philadelphia. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I was born at Fort Hood, and for any of you people listening who think, well, maybe he's a Cowboys fan. No, I'm like tradition. I'm an Eagles fan, which is maybe the worst thing you could hear. We
won't hold that against you today.
So we moved. So my dad was obviously in the military. We moved from Fort Hood to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. I mean, I think I was in Texas for 9 months or a year maybe, and then moved to Fort Monmouth, which we weren't there very long either. Then to the only, I'll say this, and I'm sure someone will correct me, but as far as I know, the coolest base the Army has is in Schofield Barracks, Hawaii. So I actually lived there for 3 years. So I was 4, 5, and 6, or 3, 4, and 5, somewhere in there. 3, 4, and 5. So my first memories of life, like your oldest memories you can dig back to, mine are Hawaii, which is pretty cool. Literally picking bananas off the banana tree outside the kitchen windows. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
And then he was transferred to the Pentagon. So we were in Haymarket, Virginia for, I don't know, 2 years maybe. And then I should have given you who was born where too. Number 8 was born there. And then we moved to pretty much actually a half a mile from where I live right now. So I didn't go far. Both of my parents are from the suburbs of Philly, and we ended up living 2 houses away from where my dad grew up, and he commuted to Fort Monmouth again from the Philadelphia suburbs, only an hour and 20-minute ride. But that's where we settled down because he was nearing the end of his career. So he knew he was going to retire. I think at the 20-year mark, he was a major, and he was pretty decorated and as it was, even as only a major, he saw, he did 2 tours of Vietnam and flew helicopters in and out of combat zones. So he was pretty, put it this way. Unfortunately, my mom passed recently, December, and she wanted to be buried in Arlington, and everyone was like, you're not getting into Arlington. That's for the generals and, Kennedys, and you can't get into Arlington. She's in Arlington.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty awesome. Yeah, I could sit and tell stories about that all day and listen to those because we've got a lot of military in our family. So to hear those stories is pretty cool, man.
I'm just the brat though. I enjoy my USAA that Gronk will never have. But,
yeah. Well, so what was it like growing up in Philly then? Getting cheesesteaks and everything else.
When I was 6 and 7, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, cheesesteak. It was, it was probably like growing up. Where'd you grow up? Probably no different than
I was in Georgia. Yeah,
Georgia. I mean, I like.
I had a lot less snow than you did. So.
Well, okay, fair enough. You know what's funny too is the seasons change. You always say to yourself, like, why do we live here? Because we have what we call the 12 seasons of Philadelphia. There's like false fall and fake spring, and it'll be 80 degrees one day in May, and then it'll be 40 2 days later, and maybe a threat of snow or something like that. It's nuts. But all in all, look, It's all I know. I was 7, right? I don't really other than picking bananas off a tree in Hawaii and, running around in Virginia. It's really all I know. I got to tell you, Philly's a great place to live. You're an hour and a half from the beach. You're an hour and a half from skiing. You're 2 hours from New York. You're, a couple hours from DC and Baltimore if you want. And, there's a lot that life has to offer here. It's a great town. And, I don't know, defending Super Bowl champions never hurts either.
I was going to say, depending on the year, it can be fun at football season, right?
It's true. It's true. We live and die by it. But,
oh, man.
I think it's probably not unlike growing up most places outside of a major city. But I do like it here. There's a lot to offer. That said, as you get older, we're talking about moving south because of the weather. It does get cold.
Yep.
We don't just get 4 seasons, like I said. We get 12. We get every possible way. But at the same time, you're sitting there in Southwest Florida.
Yep, Fort Myers, Florida.
Right, beautiful place. Love the visit. We never have a hurricane issue up here.
Right,
it's a tropical storm when that gets to us. We don't get tornadoes. We don't get
Yeah, everybody's got something, right?
Yeah.
What was your vision? What did you want to grow up and be? Did you want to be that soldier? Did you want to be the airplane pilot, or when did you start thinking about business?
No, I wasn't like I wasn't an anarchist, but I was definitely not going in the military. Maybe more to do with my dad than anything else. But I don't know. No one was going to tell me where I had to be and what I had to do. Again, it didn't guide me, but it was just, it was just there. It was just, it was more of that's not the path for me. More of a decision. Did I know I wanted to be an entrepreneur? I don't even think I knew what an entrepreneur was, to be honest. But I was one without realizing it. And I've said that recently. I was a kid who was breaking lath and selling kindling. When I was 10, 11 years old, I was shoveling driveways. I mean, my parents kind of pushed me out the door, but there was a lot of us. So if you wanted to buy a pack of gum out of the, machine or whatever, you kind of needed your own money because there wasn't any money. We weren't, it's funny. We grew up on the main line, which is a very wealthy part of Philadelphia, but we were the poorest people. My mom used to joke, 1% of the wealthiest 1% lives around the corner, but we're not it.
Yeah.
So, you kind of had to work. I caddied growing up at Overbrook Golf Club from the time I was 14 to 20, 21, somewhere in there. I paid for my high school. Went to a Jesuit high school in Philadelphia, St. Joe's Prep. I paid for it because it was a private school. I paid for it by caddying. I mean, I get financial aid and stuff, but I always had 2 jobs that ended up in here, obviously, but even prior to this, because I was always working 2 jobs. And sure enough, now I have 2 companies. One's in storage and one's in distressed debt.
Yep.
I'm thinking about slowing down soon, but it's just when people ask what's it like growing up in a big family, it's what I knew. I'm enjoying silence and peacefulness today, but when I was 14, I needed chaos around me to concentrate on my homework. If that makes sense. It's just it was the environment I was comfortable in, and that's what I knew. So I always need something going on, and I can't sit on a beach, and it's tough for me to sit on the beach and read a book. Although as I'm 51 now I'm seeing, man, there's something to all this peacefulness and stress.
So let me ask you. So, like we talked about, my dad was a baby of 9, right? And I've heard him tell stories and, brothers coming back from war, some came back from war in caskets, and just the whole process of life with that many family members, right? And who some of the brothers and sisters, the siblings, who those were that took leadership roles, who didn't, those types of things. Did you have any of that in your family? I mean, was there any brothers or sisters that kind of took a secondary role of that with that many kids of trying to say, hey,
sure. Yeah, my 2 oldest sisters, practically raised half the family. I think my oldest sister, who's only like 6 years older than me, was changing, not all the time, but changed my diapers.
Yeah,
I've changed many of my younger siblings' diapers, but the 2 oldest ones certainly were heavily involved in the babysitting, if you will, raising of us, and then I'm the oldest boy, so I've kind of assumed some of that leadership mantle as well throughout the years. And it's interesting. It's really prepared me well for life.
Yeah.
From being a parent. I mean, I kind of saw it all. I was a kid myself, but also saw everything around me in different decades, even, right? So the older kids, what they couldn't get away with, and then the older kids, what you could get away with. So there was that. And then there was also, you really, am I on the right podcast here?
Right. We're going to get to real estate. I promise.
Is this an intervention?
Yeah.
But my dad was his dad was in construction. So we lived in a 9-bedroom Victorian house because there were so many kids, but it was a house they couldn't afford it. So he tore it apart. It was an really old house, and needed work, tore it apart, put it back together, literally down to the studs. And I had to help with that, which made my childhood not very fun, but my goodness, all the skills I have today, that most people don't, like I put my room together. I wired it with, electrically. I had help in where I needed it.
Sure.
I wired it. I had help putting up the drywall. I taped and seamed it myself, sanded it, painted it. You wanted privacy, you wanted your room, and
you had to do it.
Only one dad to do it all, so you can only go one room at a time. And the girls' rooms were getting the attention, and I was like, "Well, I'd like a room, please."
Well, and part of why I go into this, right, is I want people to see. I want our audience to see that everybody doesn't start out at the top, right? We don't always start out with a silver spoon. Many of us don't. Many of us. I mean, Joe, I can't tell you how much.
Most of us don't.
Most of us don't.
Most of us make it is because we had to learn early how to fight, claw, scratch, whatever, for the nickel and the quarter to the dollar, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have. It was just myself and my sister. We only had 2 of us, but still, our stories as far as what we were doing and how we were growing, they're aligning a lot of things alike. And the reality is, just like you said, I hear that so often of people that have been successful and grown into that. They've done it because they pulled themselves up and continued to gut it out, So,
and by the way, multiple, in my case, and I'm sure in yours and others, multiple times. And it's, if I can use another movie or a Philly reference, but I'll use a movie in Rocky Balboa. It's, I'll butcher the line, but his famous line is, it's not about, getting knocked down. It's about getting back up. It's not about how hard you're hit. It's about, how hard you come back or whatever. That's what it sounds like you had to learn how to do. I had to learn how to, many people I know, many successful people I know, that's the reason they're successful, because they've dealt with adversity and loss and failure and learned from it. I think, unfortunately, that's what a lot of today's kids aren't experiencing, is everything is helicoptered and all the paths are paved for perfect success. And even if not perfect success, it's okay, because mommy and dad are here to make it all better for you. And, you're seeing it out in society. You're certainly seeing it in generations in the workforce. I mean, just kids don't understand failure. I mean, entrepreneurs I think, is a dying breed because no one wants to fail.
That's right.
No one knows how to fail. And
they're looking for their trophy.
Fail.
They're looking for their trophy that they participated. So
it's a trophy for sure.
Well, I know we've talked a little bit about basketball and joked a little bit about that, but I know that your Wildcats, you've got your Villanova shirt on today. So I know that your Wildcats were always in the news in March Madness and that whole thing, or at least they used to be, right, for a time.
Yep. And a couple of years.
Yeah. But, listen, we've had a lot of things happen for there, right? You've got the first American Pope, that's now that's his alma mater, right? Yeah. And his face will be on the signs in the student section now. But if I'm understanding correctly, you majored in finance at Villanova. So tell me what your first job was coming out of college.
Not finance. I was And by the way, the first text I got when it was announced who the Pope was from a brother-in-law. I said, "Do you think the Pope's been to Wawa?" Now, I don't know where your audience is. It sounds mostly California, but Wawa is a huge. I don't know if you know what it is.
I know exactly.
Florida. There's
My
more.
kids-
There's more Wawas in Florida than in Pennsylvania.
My daughter loves their barbecue chicken quesadilla. I'm like, from a gas station? Are you kidding me?
It's not just a gas. By the way, when Wawa started here, they wouldn't have gas stations. They were just convenience stores.
Really?
Yeah, now the new model is the gas station. But all the old Wawas up here, we don't have gas stations that are. The Wawas I go to every day are not gas stations.
Wow.
It's funny. First job was a technology company called Elcom Technologies. The ticker symbol was ELCM, and we were going public until we weren't. We were going to be rich. It was what a case study in potential and failure based on leadership. But it was a new technology that was broadcasting signals, whether they're audio signals or video signals, over the power line in your house. So the year is 1996, 97, somewhere in there. And, Wi-Fi doesn't exist. And by the way, Wi-Fi is a pipe dream that will never happen. It will never, ever happen this in 1997 because there's too much bandwidth to communicate, to project and receive, or transmit and receive over the airwaves. It's not possible, just so you know. And that's therefore our technology was the only technology that was going to work. And it did in a closed environment. And they ordered a whole bunch of the products from Malaysia. We were in Best Buy, CompUSA. I'm going to give you some old stores that don't exist. What this best around? CompUSA, Circuit City. we were in all the stores. And then all of the, and I was on the business development team. So it was really more marketing. We were designing the customer information booklets. So when you buy a product, it comes with the how-to booklet. I designed those. We went step by step with this is how you know the product. And then unfortunately, this is kind of a funny story I'll tell real quick. When we then realized, well, you got to set up a customer service department for when people call in because they don't know how to hook these things up because there was a transmitter and a receiver. So you remember back then, we were online. America was online, literally. But your computer wasn't where you wanted your computer wasn't where your phone was. So you had to call the company, the phone company, come out, run a new jack that was going to cost you a couple $100, or you could buy for $79. Easy, what was that one called? Easy Online. And you plug it in by your phone, and then you plug it in where the computer is, and it transmits the telephone signal at a solid 56.6 at least across the telephone line to your computer. And then boom, now you can put your computer wherever you have an outlet, which obviously you need anyway, and life is good. And the computer worked fine. It was the Easy TV where they were broadcasting video for the same purpose, right? You want a TV in this room and not, and the cable's over there. The video quality wasn't very good. In either case, when people would call in, we had to establish the first customer information or customer service help desk, right? And you know how there's jokes about, you've heard the jokes about hey ma'am, my computer's not working. Well, is it plugged in? Right? That literally happens. I have fielded those calls where like, you got to plug it in the wall. America's online, but not bright.
Yeah, that's true. That is definitely true.
So, so that was my first job. That company, the writing was on the wall when the returns started coming in left and right. And I was like, I don't think we're going public. And then, sure enough, they're bankrupt. I left there I took a job as a financial advisor. I didn't know the first thing about it. My buddy was working in American Express, or was applying for a job at American Express Financial Advisors. His buddy was working there and said, they're hiring. You guys should come over here and learn how to become a financial advisor. Sounded great. Some of the wealthiest guys I knew were financial advisors, portfolio, whatever, stockbrokers, I guess, back then. And some of my friends' dads, I should say, were wealthy, were that, and it seemed like a great opportunity, and it was more in line with finance, and so that's what I did for seven or so years.
So when did you get out of the technology sector then?
I was only there a year and a half, maybe.
Okay. So you were in finance then. So if that started in 96, that would have run you in maybe through 9/11, somewhere in there?
Exactly. Right just after, because 9/11 is when I decided I no longer wanted to be in the business.
Okay.
It was that week, actually. And that week, not because no stolen valor here, not because I lost a loved one in the towers or anything like that. Luckily, I only knew distantly one person. But it wasn't so much that, it was everything you were done and trained to do and learned how to do, to advise, let's say you as my client, Craig, when an event like that happened. And we had other events. We also lived through the dot-com bust right before that. You had these events, where the market just swings wildly. People are upset. I'm still a kid, really, right? I'm 20 something years, late 20s. I'm not 50 years experience in the market to say, hey, settle down. I've seen this a million times, because I haven't seen this a million times. And it never felt right. I didn't feel good. Everything I was trained to do and learn how to do and was told to do just felt like bullshit, to be honest with you. And they would give reasons. They still do it today. I still laugh when I hear, oh, the market took a hit today because the consumer price index exceeded expectations. It's like, well, how does that make sense, right? And it's because it's all priced in, and it's just not. You have no chance to win if you're just a regular. I mean, you get lucky. You timed it right, and you didn't time it right. Your timing of your life got lucky in that it was timed right. So then I saw it again. If I can skip into when I was in commercial real estate, in the 2007, 2008, really 8, 9, I was in alternative investments, raising capital for commercial real estate, 1031 exchanges mostly, but also other alternative investments. And I just saw people. I'm long out of being a financial advisor. I skipped 6 or 7 years there, which were interesting. We can go back to if you want, but staying with the point, I saw people whose retirements were cut in half. I was doing presentations in front of them. They were looking at investing in alternative investment real estate deals or distressed debt deals or whatever. And you talk to them, and their portfolios were just decimated in 2008. And they were expecting to retire or go on those cruises and I just, man, no matter what, you can't have that much exposure. And most people have 100% exposure.
Yep.
I said to myself and everyone I talked to, you cannot have that much exposure to the stock market, because I think it's important in terms of diversification to have some money in there. And by the way, most people do in your 401ks if you're working a 9-to-5 job. That's plenty of exposure.
Yep.
And my wife goes back and forth with me. Well, what about our retirement dollars? So who cares whether it's in an IRA or 401k or cash? That's a tax implication. And that's a strategy we'll deal with at that time. And we don't even know what the rules will be at that time, because we're going to be 5 Congresses, 10 Congresses from now. And who knows, what the rules will be. So to me, it's about the exposure to the market, not the risk of the tax deferred nature. And I know things can grow tax deferred, but there's plenty of ways to grow your money tax deferred, and real estate's another one. So,
yep.
Sorry. I'm being a former financial advisor, or I like to say recovering financial advisor.
Yeah, you can ask people. I go off into markets quite a bit on my talks of stuff, because I pay a lot of attention to what's going on in the markets, and as you say, to use my good old Southern slang, all the hogwash that a lot of these guys put out in the talk that they put out about it. It's like, come on, there's a lot of this. It's just let's look at some common sense stuff here.
Jim Cramer, the guy's always wrong.
Yeah,
like you could probably run a fund just by doing the opposite of what he recommends.
All right, that's going to do it today for part 1 with Joe Downs. Make sure and tune in next week for part 2.
For more information on hard money loans, trust deed investing, and upcoming events with the Norris Group, check out thenorrisgroup.com. For more information on passive investing through the DBL Capital Real Estate Investment Fund, please visit dblcapital.com.
The Norris Group originates and services loans in California and Florida under the California DRE license 01219911, Florida Mortgage Lender license 1577, and NMLS license 1623669. For more information on hard money lending, go to thenorrisgroup.com and click the hard money tab.